So the question relates to physical activity and studies into physical activity, whether people have been sports people and previously very fit, and whether that makes them more susceptible to getting disease, but also being more fatigued. I think the answer to that question is that all of the research in that field has been contradictory. Some studies say yes, some studies say no, and I think this comes back down to how studies are done. If there is no common approach to answering a question, then people are going to get different answers, because you can look at something from all different angles. And I think that's what's happening in the field, particularly with physical activity. It's also very hard to determine physical activity. An elite athlete is very different to me. Me going for a 1 kilometre run, I consider that to be high active. So, you know, I think there's a lot of complexities and intricacies in these questions that need to be asked, and we're hoping that the environmental questionnaire will help answer these questions. I think the limelight on physical activity has really come from the fact that, you know, the Italian soccer players have this higher incidence of MND. We've seen a lot of football players, American football players, our own football players, rugby players all around the world developing MND. But if it was just physical activity, then every Olympian would get MND. So when people have, I guess, a prominent profile, it's easier for them to show that, you know, maybe these group of people have a higher incidence of MND. But if it was just physical activity, I would say that we would have a higher incidence. I have a theory myself that people who are very high active, they have a very unique and very specialised neuromotor system. It's almost like they're working at the level of a Lamborghini. It's very perfect. And once you get a little scratch on your Lamborghini, that's all you see, and things will start to go wrong. With a high-performance vehicle, you need to maintain it a lot more than, say, your Toyota Corolla, which sort of just keeps pushing on. So I think maybe the neuromotor system of athletes is wired differently. That might increase their susceptibility to a lot of stresses.
In these studies of the BMI, did you break it down on gender basis and on ethnicity?
So at the moment, we have looked at our studies based on gender. Our studies are very, surprisingly, gender and age matched. So we've looked at males and females, and our controls and our MND patients are quite similar. The survival benefit from females overall may not necessarily be just in their BMI. In general, females tend to live longer anyway, and that's because of estrogenic effects. And my husband's actually previously looked at trialling an estrogenic-like compound in male mice, but we've still got to get the funding for that, but I think there's something in that. And for ethnicity, that's actually a really interesting question, and I think that's something that we need to do, but that's why we've had to expand our studies to other sites, because in Brisbane, we are predominantly getting Caucasian patients, and so we're matching with Caucasian controls. I think we don't have many people from a lot of different ethnic backgrounds, and so we're hoping that we can actually expand our studies into other countries.
Another question related to, there's been a lot of development in prosthetics and in other fields. Is there any, from your literature review, is there any work being done on combining prosthetics with the MND patients? Impacts?
I personally have not read anything as such, but I think that that's actually a very promising area, particularly with bioengineers and robotic engineers coming into the field. I know that prosthetics have been very beneficial for other conditions, and it's whether or not prosthetics can be made in such a way that they will benefit the patient, but also not impact everything else that they're doing in their day-to-day lives, as well as what their carers are providing.
To get on your trial, do you ask your neurologist? Or do you approach Queensland, approaching people direct?
Okay, so to get into a clinical trial, you would need to see a neurologist. for that, because the neurologist is the person who's overseeing the trials and actually recruiting people. So in New South Wales, you've got Professor Matt Kiernan and Steve Vucic, as well as Professor Dominic Rowe in New South Wales. They're the three major neurologists who are involved in the clinical trials. Usually the clinical trials are done in these hospitals where you have one prominent neurologist. So in Queensland, for instance, we have people, I mean, Queensland's a lot bigger than New South Wales, but we have people coming all the way from up north to be involved in trials, but they need to come down to see that neurologist where the trial is active.
I have some audience questions here. So plasma injections, do they help with muscle weakness? And have you seen them being used with people with MND?
Plasma injections?
Plasma injections.
I can't say that I've heard of anybody I've met talking about plasma injections. I'm not sure what the basis behind the plasma injection would be, though. Is that potentially looking at antibodies in the plasma? Plasma injections, I know they use IgGs for other conditions, and IgGs that are in plasma or compounds, but I've never personally heard of it being used for MND.
Okay. Another one. How far away are we from finding a cure for MND? Is it months? Is it years? In your opinion?
In my opinion, it's going to be years. We've worked hard for many, many years, and we are making good progress. I think to be able to stop MND is one thing. I think a lot of the trials at the moment are aiming to slow disease or to stop the disease altogether, but then there's reversing the damage that's been done and, you know, giving function back to people. I think the cure is difficult because it's not just one thing that we're targeting. The body it's an amazing thing in that when one thing goes wrong, it tries to compensate by changing something else. And so as you progress through disease, multiple things are changing to different levels between different people. And so the cure for MND, I believe, is not going to be the same for each person. Each person is going to need their own cure because different things are going on at different times, whether that's genetics and how you respond to a drug or whether that's how your body responds to the disease. But I would like to see, and I'm sure everyone would like to see, a cure coming in the next few years. But I certainly don't think it would be months. That would be irresponsible for me to say that it would be months.
Last audience question from me, is how much money came into Australia for research from the Ice Bucket Challenge?
It was a few million, actually, and 1 million went to set up the SALSA initiative that Ian Blair spoke about. And that's actually run by Ian Blair and Naomi Ray in Brisbane. And the reason why that Ice Bucket Challenge, that $1 million was awarded to that grant, is because it was very forward-thinking in its approach. So we have, well, Australia's a big place, and we have clinics all throughout Australia. The thing is, people were doing things slightly differently. And we needed, well, Naomi and Ian thought that we needed a foundation where people would agree to doing certain things, so everyone was collecting data in a consistent way. We were collecting and processing our samples in a consistent way, so that all the data that we were generating, no matter where we were in Australia, that we could always cross-compare it. And so that $1 million from the Ice Bucket Challenge for this grant has established that platform, as well as the online database for this. So patients, a neurologist can actually enter this database and enter information in real time. And they can actually pull up information about people in real time before their next clinic. So it's a fantastic resource, and I think a very, very worthy of a $1 million investment from MND Australia.
3 million in total.
3 million in total.
One more. Okay, hang on. Can you be involved in the muscle biopsy research in Sydney, if you're in Sydney?
I'm not aware of anyone in Sydney or New South Wales taking the muscle biopsies at the moment. We've had very active participation in Brisbane. We've had 36 MND biopsies and 20 biopsies from people without MND. So we've actually got very high intake of people into these studies because they want to contribute their cells, not only for the drug development process, but for also understanding the disease. So I'm not aware of anyone doing this particular research in Sydney, but we'd be happy to have people come to Brisbane. I know it's a long way and there's a lot of logistics behind it, but we'd be happy for people to come to Brisbane as well, to be involved. Yeah, because the muscle sample is a lot more finicky than the skin sample. So if you take a skin sample here, you can actually send it either to Melbourne or Brisbane, and that the skin cell will actually be okay. So we have patients in Brisbane signing up for the skin biopsies, and we also have ethics to send those skin samples down to Melbourne as part of their big drug screening program. The muscle sample is very different because once you remove the muscle from the individual, the cells are susceptible to dying because muscle is very energy hungry, and it just burns through everything that the muscle is sitting in. And so on site we do it at UQ, and I had to modify our approach because it was a 1-hour journey from the hospital to our lab, and we noticed that the muscle samples weren't actually surviving very well. So we're now taking the biopsies on site at UQ, where the distance is 10 minutes, and we're getting fantastic results. So unfortunately, in that sense, the muscle is a bit finicky. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Are you looking for people with MND and people without MND for that muscle?
Yes, yes. So we look for people with MND and people without MND for all of our studies. So as part of the appetite study, we do a lot of brain imaging. I also went through the MRI to see whether or not it was feasible. It was actually really fun. And we have a lot of people with and without MND involved in that study. So in Brisbane, we always include people without MND, not only because we can compare MND patients to people who don't have MND, but that also allows us to compare MND patients to themselves as they progress.
And do you exclude people who are related to people who have MND?
No, we do not. Our primary exclusion criteria is someone who has diabetes, because diabetes will affect your metabolism.